everyone! Welcome to our latest STEM Fellowship video, where we'll be looking at how lessons learned from past epidemics can help us potentially mitigate the effects of the COVID pandemic. This is the second video in our Epidemiology mini-series, so if you haven't seen our first video yet, be sure to check it out to learn more about the history of epidemiology and about infamous historical pandemics. Today, we'll be focusing on one specific virus that is closely related to COVID-19, the SARS coronavirus. We'll be comparing the two viruses and looking at how the effective contact tracing used during SARS can be better applied to today's world. If you guys don't remember from last time, the SARS outbreak occurred from 2002 to 2004. Both SARS and COVID belong to a group of viruses called coronaviruses, named for the crown-like spikes on their surfaces. Because these two viruses are so closely related, we can learn a lot from SARS about COVID. There are two major ways that coronaviruses are thought to spread: from person to person through respiratory droplets and from contact with contaminated surfaces. Coronaviruses also tend to be more fragile with increased heat and increased humidity. This is not to say that these climate factors are enough to stop the spread of these viruses. In the SARS pandemic, we saw that infection did not necessarily stop because of warmer weather, but rather because of the political and scientific choices that were put into place to control that epidemic. These choices might help us become more informed about our current pandemic. Although they are both coronaviruses, SARS and COVID-19 differ in their lethality and their infectiousness. While SARS is significantly more lethal, COVID-19 is much more infectious. SARS had an overall case fatality rate of approximately 10% and an even greater rate of 50% in persons older than 60. On the other hand, COVID-19 has a fatality rate of approximately 3%. Although its rapid spread through communities is what has made it more of a global health crisis than SARS. There are other key differences as well. About 80% of people with COVID-19 only have a mild illness. Many may not even realize they're sick. This makes it harder to determine who's infected and who's not. Finally, COVID-19 is now spreading easily within communities. This was not the case in SARS, which was more commonly spread in healthcare settings. Since 2003, our world has become much more globally connected, making it easier for COVID-19 to spread between regions and countries. As mentioned before, we'll be focusing on contact tracing during SARS and COVID in this video. So, first of all, what is contact tracing? Well, contact tracing is exactly what the name suggests, tracing the recent contacts of any infected individuals in order to prevent further transmission of the virus. This can be broken down into three major steps. 1. Contact identification. With the help of the infected individual, any contacts within the maximum period of infectiousness, which is around 2 weeks for COVID, are identified. 2. Contact listing. An effort is made to inform every listed contact that they may have been infected and the next steps they should take, such as quarantining or getting tested. 3. Contact follow-up. All contacts continue to be monitored for symptoms of the virus. Before we look at contact tracing during both SARS and COVID, we should mention that for contact tracing to be effective and efficient, several factors should be taken into consideration. First, patient trust and confidentiality brings up important privacy concerns that may arise with contact tracing. Second, experts have also brought up the importance of speed in contact tracing. Third, we not only need more contact tracers, but also widespread public cooperation to increase the speed of contact tracing. If too many individuals refuse to participate, public health risks losing one of the best means of stopping COVID-19. Right, so what was contact tracing like during SARS? Contact tracing was actually really effective with SARS, largely because symptoms were severe and therefore easier to identify and contain for successful early case investigations. As we discussed, it also had a lower infection rate, and since virus infection cases grow exponentially, this allowed contact tracing to be easier and faster than what we might expect for COVID-19. There are also many more COVID-19 cases, and due to both that and the number of asymptomatic transmissions, there is a greater backlog with contact tracing and a general lack of contact tracing investigations when compared with SARS. Dr. Christine Kruder-Johnson explains that when you don't have the data, you have no clue what direction you are headed and how to pivot or point, and where to point your public health measures. It's very, very challenging. You need good surveillance data, good contact tracing, good diagnostic tests to really help inform and steer the public health response. To put this issue in a Canadian context, on November 24, CBC reported that roughly 85% of active cases in the province of Alberta had no identified source. This seems to indicate that contact tracing during COVID is much less effective than it was during SARS. So is it possible that we're doing something wrong with COVID-19? Honestly, we can't really give a satisfactory answer to that question. As we discussed, these viruses have significant differences in their lethality, transmissibility, and even symptoms. These differences lead to the comparative successes and limitations of contact tracing between the two pandemics. Overall, it's very difficult to say, oh look, we did this during SARS, it'll work again during COVID. Because again, even though they're both coronaviruses, they're so different. However, we can learn from SARS that time is of the essence with contact tracing. In order to identify contacts effectively and efficiently, we need to resolve privacy concerns, increase contact tracing capacity, and ensure that contacts do not interact with others to protect communities from further spread. It is nonetheless still important to note that these lessons can only serve as guidelines that can potentially help with COVID-19. We can see, though, that there is an undeniably large role played by public compliance, along with public health and government agencies in mitigating the effects of pandemics. So, in conclusion, while SARS can provide a general framework for our approach to COVID, both pandemics have key differences which make it far from a perfect blueprint. The investigation of COVID-19 cases and its contact tracing are critical to the control of pandemics. So it's important to understand not only the work of healthcare professionals and essential workers during this pandemic, but also the work of case investigators and contact tracers. If you're interested in more videos about the spread of infection and disease, then be sure to tune in for our upcoming STEM Fellowship video, where we'll be looking at how epidemiologists model infectious diseases.